Hi, everybody. It's Michelle Hill, your legacy builder at Winning Proof, and I am here for another episode of Winning Proof Unscripted. Today, I have a special guest, Ellen Rothstein, and she is a transition coach. And before we get into the conversation, I'm going, as usual, going to read her bio so I don't miss anything. Ellen Rothstein is a certified life transition coach. Everyone faces transitions such as divorce, career change, becoming an empty nester, facing retirement, having a baby, moving. And as we approach a new phase in life, it can shift us into uncertainty, excitement, fear, and doubts. Ellen helps her clients get unstuck and acquire self-assurance as they envision what their transition will look like, ensuring they gain new insight and fresh perspective. Before becoming a coach, Ellen received a BA from University of California, Berkeley, and worked as a successful artist for many years. She is a published author for Medium.com and She Is You magazine. And I'm going to stop there and then we can fill in the blanks, Ellen. But welcome. Thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here.
We'll
happily fill in the blanks.
Yeah, we're going to fill in the blanks. What about your bio did I not include because I chopped some parts that you want to include and tell people about?
Well, I would like to talk about how I ended up becoming a life transition coach. I had a very varied career. I've worn a lot of hats, and I'm recently discovering this is the hat that fits the best. But I started out as an artist, as you mentioned, and I was an exhibiting artist. I had galleries and I had exhibits and I had clients buying my paintings in their collections and privately and corporately and so on. And then eventually I transitioned away from that myself. That was my first major transition, in part because I didn't know if I was going to sell another painting in 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. And it got a little hard to financially live on that. So I ended up taking a circuitous path, and I ended up in advertising, not in the creative part, as you might think, but more in the account management part, managing the people that made the creative work and the clients and the other parts of the industry, the media buys and so on. And so I learned a lot, and I kind of struggled to find my place, quite honestly. I still had one foot on the creative side, but I wasn't actually creating. And I had a foot in the people part, which sometimes worked out great and other times could be frustrating, as it is with any situation. Yeah. Then an interesting thing happened. I worked for a man who published a book at the beginning of the dot-com era. Yes, it was that long ago. And I got all excited about this, and then eventually ended up shifting out of advertising and working for a startup. And that was so much fun. It was so energizing, working with these people that were just bursting with ideas, engineering ideas, creative ideas, off the wall ideas. And that was incredibly fun. And that lasted for quite a few years. And then eventually I found my way back into advertising, and then eventually working for a digital media company. And the reason I'm going through all this detail is to demonstrate that I have made a lot of transitions within just the career space myself. And finally, in 2019, pre-pandemic, I got laid off. And with a lot of other people, it was, the business wasn't doing well. And then I thought, okay, I'll just go get another job. But being an older woman in San Francisco, which is a young tech town, that was not so easy. And I discovered I could get far in the process, in the hiring process, but I wouldn't actually get hired. And then I got hired for a contract position, and it was an absolute nightmare. I was trying to fit myself as a round peg in a square hole. I was a senior project manager for an advertising agency in the pharma space, which is extremely exacting. And I had the most toxic boss ever. And it was an absolute awful, awful situation. And when the contract was over, they didn't renew me and I didn't want to renew them. So at that point, I was stuck because I had spent all this time, the years in these industries, trying to be something that I really wasn't. So that's when I hit my kind of soul searching moment.
Yeah.
And I was working with a life coach. And in fact, before I go on anymore, I've been talking pretty nonstop here. Do you want to interject and ask any questions or say anything before I continue?
I am engaged in your story because so you continue. I can relate to you because I have experienced most of my life transitions besides marriage, non-marriage, kids, all that. But most of mine have been after 40,
Mhm.
in the life transition. So go right ahead. Continue your story. I'm engaged and interested.
So I then had to figure out, what am I going to do? I have to find something that works better for me. I am not content. I'm only beating myself up. I'm feeling like my performance is so less than. And one thing that saved me, though, was when I had an exit interview from that horrific job. We did not exit interview with the toxic boss. It was with this guy who was an equal to her in terms of hierarchy. But he said, you know what? It's not you. You are great with the people, the clients, the other team members. You are great with the people. Don't let this define you, or something along those lines. And I was like, oh, wow, thank you so much. Because I was feeling like I can't do this. I'm a failure at this point in my career, and I've been doing this forever.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, I was working with a life coach anyway to try to sort through my feelings about my professional life. And what I really came down to identify was I looked at the moments I had been the happiest in all my jobs.
Yes.
And it was when I was being the liaison between different people. An example was at the digital media company. I was the liaison between the CEO, the leadership team, and the engineers. Now, far be it from me to speak engineering. I am not an engineer. However, I found a way, and also the sales team. So I found a way for these three groups to work through problems. And it was incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
I loved that. I loved other moments where I would work with the creative teams and the clients, and we would find a solution and everybody was happy. Not all the time they were, but most of the time. So I discovered it was really the people part. I didn't love any of the other sides to the businesses, but what I loved was the people part. And I thought, okay, now I'm onto something. This has been a common thread, aside from my creativity, which is still a parallel thread, which I still do. But what could I do on a professional way? And my life coach said, you might want to think about coaching, because I had related to her a lot of instances where I had been talking to family and friends. And she said, you might want to think about that. And I had dipped my toe in the water over the years in coaching. I'd taken a few classes, but I thought, okay, I think she's right. I think she is finally helping me figure this out. So during the pandemic, when everything was locked down, I enrolled and got certified as a life coach. And I finally figured out what made sense for me. And, starting your own business, certainly at the age I'm at, is not an easy task. So
I know.
that part of it is still daunting and scary. But I have to say, since then, I have gotten into the coaching part with clients. I'm writing, as you mentioned in the bio. I'm also doing podcasts. I've done a live radio interview and so on. So now I feel like I'm finding my voice. I'm finding the part of me that makes me happy that I can share with other people. I can help people get through transitions just as I have. And even though I haven't experienced some of those other transitions, I certainly have developed the tools to help them. And also I've had babies and I'm an empty nester. So, there are other transitions I've had besides career. But it's possible, I think, for me to be able to bring those tools and the benefits of my experience to help other people facing their own versions of that.
Oh, that is so real. And transition is part of life from the time you're born, from the time you're conceived, really. But as we mature, and as we get older, it's just they're different transitions. So if somebody comes to you and says, oh man, I'm going through let's just use career as an example, a career transition, when is the time to come to a transition coach? When it's already over and you wish you knew what you had right before, during the middle? Bring some clarity to that.
I would say the earlier the better.
Yeah.
Because as one starts thinking about that transition, one can get very stuck.
Yes.
You start to think about all of the things that could prevent it from going well. It's really easy to get paralyzed by fear-based feelings rather than evidence-based feelings. So there may be no evidence that this career transition is going to be bad, but it's really easy to fall into that fear-based place. And it's also really easy to start getting more narrow about your feelings and focus as you are limiting yourself. Those are called limiting beliefs. You don't believe you can do something. And we all have those in our inner voice can be very critical at those times. Part of it too is fear of the unknown. And if you're at the very beginning of thinking about that transition, you may not have done all the research that you can do, because oftentimes the more information you have, the better armed you are to face that transition with a somewhat more positive outlook. Because ultimately, what I can help people do is find a way to be positive about it, to move forward, because otherwise they're going to be dragging themselves and they're going to be weighed down by all the shoulds,
yes,
rather than all the things they want to have happen. So I think the earlier they can start with working with me, or just at the very least start planning it out for themselves, the better off they're going to be. Now, a lot of people don't do that. And it's still helpful when you're in the midst of the transition, because then you have some known factors that you can look at and you can say, okay, for example, if someone is going to, well, a good example is a client that I had. She took an early retirement package from a major corporation where she had worked for 20 years. And she was ambivalent about the whole thing, but she had worked her buns off and she had raised 2 kids and she was just ready to take the package. But once she did, she didn't know what to do, because she still had a lot of enormous guilt about, I'm young, I should work full time. I should look for another job. I should.
Yes.
She really didn't want to. And so we worked through that feeling of should. Where did that come from? What were the realities? What were her financial realities? What were her family realities? And eventually she felt freed up enough not to pursue a full-time job. And she was able to create a source of income. She turned part of her home into an Airbnb. And she also started working a little bit on the side as a consultant. And she put together a whole new life that when she was at the beginning of this transition, she couldn't possibly have known that she was going to work through that guilt level of those shoulds. She just thought she was going to have to get back out there and write that resume and start hitting the pavement.
Yeah. And that's where an outside coach, a transition coach like you, can really help, because even though we can Google anything and find out, you can Google how to make a career transition, how to this and that, but that information is, some of it's wrong. Some of it's, as they say, misinformation. Some of it doesn't guide you in the right place. So talking to a professional transition coach can really, like you said, help the client gain clarity on the next best step to take.
Really, it's a way of personalizing all that information. Some of the information is relevant, but it's hard to act on it. And some of it, as you acutely point out or accurately point out, is not relevant. It's not accurate.
Yes.
And so I can help them drill down into their own specific situation And it's not therapy, don't get me wrong. We're not looking at past problems. I'm not doing any therapeutic analysis of how they got to that situation. All I'm doing is helping them understand where they are and gain clarity. And then from that, we can help them figure out what that, I hate to use the word goal because that's a loaded word, but what that end of that transition can be like. And what I really love doing with them is collaborating on a realistic, actionable action plan, where we put together goals and put together timelines and put together a way of prioritizing them and put together this actionable plan that is totally customized for them. And then I can help them achieve those goals and be accountable, which is really hard to do by yourself.
It really is. It really, really is. And that's where the accountability of a coach and the outside perspective of a coach can really help someone navigate, because they can be choppy waters. And that's what I really, kind of want to drill down into, is how can someone like that's just going through a tough transition, some transitions can be, okay, this is a smooth transition. I went from being single to married. Oh, lovely, lovely. But when someone's going through choppy transition, how can they, if they're going to work with a coach, how does their mindset shift? I guess that's what I'm trying to ask. How can their mindset shift to make them realize the beauty in the transition? If that makes sense, I hope.
It does. It absolutely does. At least it does to me.
Okay.
The first thing about that is when you're working with a coach, as opposed to a family or friend, friends and family, there is no judgment.
Yes.
There is no criticism. There is only listening. It isn't about making that person get somewhere. It's not giving advice. It's not guiding them. When you talk to family and friends, it's impossible for those people not to have opinions and not to want to steer you and end up making you feel either criticized and judged at the worst end of the spectrum, or just self-doubting in sort of at the other end. So the most important thing is to realize that you leave that at the door, that the coach, in this case me, I'm not going to be criticizing. I'm not going to be judging. I'm just going to be listening. And so the how is what happens when the client starts talking. Often they'll start out one place and end up somewhere else, because as they start talking, they realize that this isn't really the issue at hand. For example, I had a client that found me because I'd written an article about grandparents and babysitting. Basically, don't ask me to do it. And this woman had grandchildren, and she was moving close to her daughter with the children, and she didn't want to babysit. And she was trying to figure out how to deal with that and approach her daughter. But what really came out is that she had recently been laid off from a job she loved. And one reason she didn't want to babysit, which she didn't even think about, is that she didn't want to stop working. She wanted to still do something valuable. And then we started to unpack that. And we realized she didn't want to work full time. She had tried volunteering, but that hadn't gone so well. So we looked at why. And we started unraveling some of this feeling of lostness that she was feeling about this transition. And it wasn't about the babysitting. That's what she thought it was going to be about. But really, it was about finding her purpose. What could she do to re-engage herself with a purpose? And sure, she could then deal with the babysitting. That became sort of a side issue, but not the foremost issue.
Okay, yeah, and that makes sense. On what ends up, because I just went through about 7 months of executive coaching, and what you start off with in the conversation is usually not the root. And to go back to what you said, no, you're not a therapist with, like childhood stuff, but often it's rooted in triggers maybe from childhood where somebody says, I'm having such a tough time with this transition, but it really is kind of a trigger in their specific situation from a childhood issue. It's just a trigger. So do you help them without doing the therapy, but do you help them move through that trigger?
We identify the trigger. We're not going to go back and look at the past trauma that caused the trigger,
Yes.
but we're now going to be aware of that trigger. We're going to, she or he will notice, oh, I know why I'm feeling this way. It's that trigger. And therefore, I know how to deal with this. I know that when I'm feeling this trigger, I can look at, XYZ, or it's like, oh yeah, I can name this trigger, and then I can find a way to move through it, past it, around it, whatever. But I don't have to go back in the past to uncover the trauma that caused the trigger.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes perfect sense. So another question would be, do you find that women come to you mostly? Do men come to you mostly? Is it a combination? Who comes to you for help?
It's mostly women, but not exclusively women.
Okay.
And I don't want it to be exclusively women. Men have their transitions to go through too, for sure. I worked with one younger man. He was trying to transition because he was sort of parallel doing two different career tracks. And there was the should track, and then there was the I want track.
Yeah.
And so at the end of our time together, he had found a way not to let go of either one. But he had found a way to give himself permission to pursue the I want track more than he thought he could. And so he ended up being able to move forward in that. So it isn't exclusively women, but oftentimes women are more apt to experience and be aware of the emotional transition that happens, particularly around children. Having babies, I know when I had mine, it totally changed my life. And it was hard to find the person I was before I became a mother. Whereas my husband was still pretty much that person. There wasn't as huge a difference. And empty nest, when my second and last child left, I was bereft. My husband was like, oh, okay, now his stuff won't be here. I mean, I'm exaggerating. That isn't exactly.
Of course.
But for me, it was much more life-changing. It was a much bigger transition for me.
Yes.
And so I think I tend to work with women more for that reason, that they may have a greater emotional awareness or need, or just, it just seems, or maybe the types of issues we're talking about, women in careers, it's tough. Women, there's ageism out there. There's all kinds of things that are more likely to affect women than men.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, I think women, when marriage counseling happens, it's mostly, as you're saying, the women are seeking it out because of that. They want that emotional connection of help, somebody help us. And the man is like, everything's fine. What are you talking about? So I can totally resonate with that as far as, women more tend, not that men, men go through some severe transitions, life transitions, but it's women are more likely to say, hey, I need help.
Yeah. In my experience, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
It depends on the man, and it depends what kind of shape they're in. But yes, I think to make a sweeping generalization, it's more likely to be women.
Yeah. Okay. So what can you share a success story of somebody that came to you completely muddled in what word to go, what the next step is, and then what happened? Yes. And I know you've shared that already with one of your clients, but share another one, because
I'd be happy to. I have a client that she also had been laid off, and she was kind of on the fence about it. On the one hand, she really liked what she did, but on the other, she was excited about all the new things she could do. She was a very energetic person. And so then she started talking about wanting to work more with the LGBTQ community because her son was very active in that, and she thought she could really help. And she started reaching her network and having all these ideas about things that she could do. And then it was kind of hitting a dead end. She had the most elaborate action plan. She was so good at doing her homework and ranking and doing all this stuff, which was wonderful, but she kind of got lost in that. But as she started to talk to her network, other things came out. She realized that she is a problem solver. It isn't about wanting to support her son as much as it is about wanting to be useful in a problem-solving capacity.
Yeah.
And she had an education background. And so the people she was talking to were in the education field. And gradually what happened was she reconnected with colleagues she had been out of touch with. And one of them said, what about this? I need someone who can do XYZ. And basically it was the job description written perfectly for her. And we talked about whether she wanted to work full-time or part-time and just how that went. And she was going through, I think, a fairly difficult divorce at the time. And she concluded that she only wanted to do it part-time. So she went back to this colleague, and said, I'm very interested. Can we work something out? And they did. And I followed up with her a few times, a few months later, a few times. She was so happy. She found the perfect situation for herself. Not that anything is totally perfect, but she found a situation where she got to be a real problem solver. And she hadn't gone off in another direction. She had been true to her strengths and what she really found the most satisfying. So that was a complete success.
I love that. And I think it's often in motion. If somebody sits on the couch and wrings their hands and doesn't know what to do and is stymied by the fear and the doubt and everything, no opportunities are going to present themselves because you're not in motion. But like your client, she was in motion. This didn't work or that didn't work, or she wanted a certain situation, but she was in motion. And I think that's where, as you're in motion, opportunities come.
Yes, but she also didn't do wasted motion. If she had been on her own, she would have spun her wheels. She would have she would have spent so much extra time and energy investigating things that didn't ultimately take her where she needed to go.
Yeah.
So we could harness her energy and we could make it more focused. And that's what really got her to where she ended up.
Yeah, and that's what a coach can do. A transition coach like yourself is fast track the progress, fast track the clarity, fast track it to where you're not just going. Yeah, you could be in motion, but like you said, wasted motion. So that's where a coach would come in, is getting you, narrowed to let's do this and this, or have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And presenting ideas, and not all your ideas like, no, I don't want to do that. I know that, but just in the activity of suggesting and brainstorming and helping them gain clarity, that's when the answers come.
Yeah. And sometimes it's surprising. And also when asking them why they don't want to do something, I think about the 5 whys, which came from my Lean Six Sigma training a long time ago. Ask them why. This helps them get to their limiting beliefs. Why do you think you can't do that? Well, this. Okay, why this? And this is not meant to be an intrusive, uncomfortable path of questions. And I can back off if it seems like it is. But why? Let's look at that. You have an assumption here. Let's look at the assumption. Is it based on evidence that this has happened? Is it based on a fear that this might happen? And okay, so then we get one more level into that. And why do you think this? And sometimes it can help rewire their thinking. I can't think of a specific example immediately that comes to mind, but sometimes it can help them reframe how they're looking at something.
Yes.
And it provides more possibilities.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So who is your perfect client? Who lights up your world if they come to you and say, I need transition coaching? What does that look like?
I think it's someone that's motivated to get through the transition, that isn't dragging their feet. Let's say it's her feet. Let's say that she has spent some time talking to family and friends and hasn't made progress and feels a little bit stuck or a lot stuck.
Okay.
And actually a lot stuck is good, because then she's going to probably be more open to exploring things, to looking at those limiting beliefs, and is more motivated to try to find some clarity. And she has a clear transition. It isn't muddled by multiple transitions, but has a clear transition and is willing to do some thinking about it. I won't say hard work, because sometimes thinking is hard work and sometimes it's not, but is also willing to collaborate on an action plan. Because some people are like, well, I don't know. And other people are, yes, and not tell me what to do, but let's figure out these 3 things you want to accomplish. What's the most important?
Yes.
What's a realistic time frame? Yes, you want to, contact all these tech companies. Okay. First, let's narrow it down. Let's get the 5 tech companies you want to contact. How are you going to contact them? When you say contact, what does that mean? Does that mean you shoot one email? Does that mean you leave a voicemail? What does that mean? And then let's say you want to get a face-to-face informational interview at 5 companies. That's not going to happen in 2 weeks. Let's figure out what's a realistic time frame. And so working with her on an action plan that is doable and that is where she's accountable. And then when we reconvene, we can talk about how that went, what happened, what didn't happen, how can we fine tune that for the next time. And it's an iterative process.
Yes. Yes.
So
is it usually done in one session?
No.
10 a year? What is the time frame that you typically work with a client? Because you can have a 60-minute session and get to the root, maybe get something unearthed, but it's not going to be solved in 60
I
minutes.
liken it to when you have a baby, it takes 9 months. You don't lose the weight in 1 month. Often it takes 9 months to lose the weight. And everybody's situation is different. Everybody loses the weight at different rates. But with the transition coaching, sure, we can sort of do a meet and greet in a first session, and I can get a sense of the lay of the land and the scope of the transition. But really, it takes multiple, I'm just going to throw this out there, like 6 sessions.
Yeah.
I do a package for 6 sessions.
Yes.
To get people to make some, really slowly unpack these things and make some progress. Can you make progress in 3 sessions? Sure. But then it has to be a pretty simplified type of transition. And then also for the accountable part, that can take a little longer. But sure, it could be a year, but I haven't ever personally worked with anybody for a year.
Yeah. Okay. And that makes sense. So several sessions to get them on the right track and everything like that. So anything that I didn't cover that you want to leave with viewers?
Simply that everybody has transitions. Some are harder to go through than others, as you talked about earlier. But for those that are harder, getting somebody on your side, getting somebody to really help you face that and get somewhere with a positive, energetic, confident point of view is a whole lot better than trying to do it on your own. So in that case, I would encourage you, if you are actively going through a transition or thinking about a transition, facing one soon, you could be looking at retirement, you could be having to move, whatever it may be. contact me. And you can find me on my website, which is Ellen, ELLEN, Rothstein, ROTHSTEIN.com. Or you can email me at ellen@ellenrothstein.com. And I'd be happy to talk to you. It can be informal. It can just be a meet and greet thing. It doesn't have to be a commitment of any kind.
That is wonderful to know. And I hope that people, viewers, hear what you have to say, really hear, and that they will act on it, because I know there's some transitions. And actually, I was doing something else in my business. Like I was a ghostwriter for 6 years, and it was starting to suck the life out of me. And even when you have your own business, there's still transitions that take place in yourself and in that business. And I was just, oh man, I didn't start my business to be this miserable. I didn't want to get new clients and this and that. And then I went to, I think it was a networking event online. And the lady said, if you've fallen out of love with your business, sometimes it just takes a shift to 15 degrees to the right or to the left. And I did that. And I thought, what do I love to do? I love to put all the pieces together. I love to connect, all that. And it transformed me and my business. Like I am so joyful in the way I conduct business because my teammates do all that. So in sharing that, do you, like if I came to you and said, oh yeah, my business, but I want to keep my business, I want to do it full time, but I'm just not fulfilled in what I'm doing, would you help them unearth?
Absolutely. So that would be easy.
Okay.
We could figure out what it is that makes you happy in general, in other areas of your life.
Yes.
And we could figure out what is making you happy about this business and look at what isn't. And what can we do to make those 15-degree shifts? So yeah, that would definitely work.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's those little shifts that make a huge difference. We don't have to change our whole life and move to another place because we're not fulfilled in our business where we are, any of that. Sometimes it's just the little shifts that maybe they talk to you and they say, oh my gosh. Then they have those, you bring aha moments to people. Really, you serve them.
That's the goal. I love those aha moments.
Yes. Well, thank you. You told us I would ask you how people connect with you, but you said that. I'm so glad you did. And I will put all your information in the show notes so people can access you and, contact you, reach out to you. And I thank you, Ellen. You have been delightful and very informative. And I'm thankful that you spent time today.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I've enjoyed every moment of it. And you do come off as joyful for sure, which I
am a joyful person, and I love what I do now that I've shifted the last 2 or 3 years. So I will end with saying thank you, everybody, for watching this episode or for listening to this episode of Winning Proof Unscripted. If you liked it, I'm trying to get subscribers. Please subscribe. Please like this. Please share it. And that would really help me out personally. And it will help your network because they'll get the benefit of all the great things that Ellen had to say. And so until next time, thank you for watching another episode of Winning Proof Unscripted.